So at the end of the last video, we were looking at this tendency of these new extremely wealthy families to buy massive estates. The Vanderbilts were probably the ones who were most conspicuous with their consumption. So this idea of displaying your wealth as a way of suggesting that you have a special social status. This was not something that Americans did a whole lot. Obviously, in the South, this was more acceptable in plantation society and in Southern regional culture, as we talked about before. But this is a whole other level. I mean, this is not sort of a Monticello or a plantation house. I mean, these are residences that were modeled after European castles. And this is Italian, French architecture. A lot of the materials are brought in from abroad. This is the Biltmore dining room. Obviously, when you have a dining room of this size with the triple fireplace and massive 150-foot ceilings and so forth, this is about not just showing off your wealth, but making sure that it's widely shown off. So not only are you inviting all of the other industrialists and rich people to join you, these became sort of vacation homes. It also was something where the press was encouraged to cover these sorts of things. So if you've ever been at Newport and you've seen the breakers, I'm sure you probably saw this in your U.S. history courses. This was just the summer cottage. So this was their $70 million summer cottage, which again was the center for a lot of parties and a lot of social events that happened in Newport in the summer. If you go to New York City, the Astor Mansion, which was a place where a lot of parties were held on Fifth Avenue. We don't have a photograph of it because it burned down. But this also has the look of a chateau. And this idea of having these massive mansions that were the center of social life and for the display of wealth, not just to the broader population, but to everybody that came inside. So this broader cultural pattern is referred to as conspicuous consumption. This was a sociologist named Thorsten Veblen who basically said, at this point in the early 20th century, here's Jay Gould's living room. You notice there's a lot. If I were to ask you, not only is it in the way the architecture is set up, the stained glass windows, which are made by Tiffany, the chandeliers, which are custom, all of the European artwork, all of which was worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. The very fine rugs, high-end furniture, everything is meant to be displayed. So this idea of spending money on luxury goods for social display to show off. And so the demonstration of your social status by displaying your wealth, we see this as well in the modern example of this. Here's Bill Gates' house in Seattle. This is a whole. This isn't quite as in your face, but again, mansions and things like that. So if you look at this idea of consumer goods and leisure activities and golf clubs and private clubs and vacations, you can see versions of this actually in the Concord Carlisle community. Do you belong to Heritage? Do you belong to the Concord Country Club? Do you belong to the Country Club in Brookline? These are all status symbols and ways that you can demonstrate your social status. So this whole idea of showing off your leisure, this is a whole other new way of you work really hard, but then once you're on your vacation, you essentially demonstrate to everybody else through how you spend your resources, what kind of social status you have. So I think that this is still very much a thing in modern culture. If you look at how this extends out in the Gilded Age, they were having these giant parties in these high-end restaurants in New York. If you look carefully here, men, industrialists wearing gilded wreaths on their heads. They're literally dressed up as Roman emperors in their tuxedos. You can see a lot of them are quite heavy. That's because they're eating stuff, 5-course meals with imported stuff from Europe. This is very much a great example of the conspicuous consumption that we were just talking about. So if you look at all of this, underneath this, you have the social order, which we talked about a little bit last time. So the rich, the super rich, are going to be almost entirely white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And they are going to see their position as a natural offshoot of their, as far as they see it, their cultural and racial superiority. So the social Darwinism that overlays a lot of this is kind of the justification. Now, it's interesting, as we talked about this last time, the tension between the rich and the poor, the working poor, who were, in most cases, living in tenement houses, many of whom didn't speak English. Their ethnicity, they were Southeastern European, darker skinned. You can see that on the left. And in terms of their religion, most of them were Catholic or Orthodox or Jewish. And so their religion was different. Their ethnicities was different. They were a people apart, not only in the social class system, but also in where they lived in the city. In the middle, you have this middle class, and the term that was used at the time was status anxiety, because they were afraid, obviously, that they were going to fall into that working class. And most of that middle class, as you can see, also were either Anglo-Saxons or assimilated Irish or assimilated Germans. And that middle class now, in these professions like law, medicine, engineering, management, and education, these were jobs that the middle class wanted to kind of solidify. So what happens is, as the middle class wants to kind of gain control of these jobs, they begin to form associations and barriers to entry. Well, what does that mean? The middle class begins to form associations. So if you look at, for example, schools of social work or business schools, you never used to have to go to a business school. You just started your business. But now, if you have to go to business school, not only do you need the money to go to an undergraduate school, you also need the money to go to a graduate school. So you're now putting increased barriers to entry to these things and allowing the middle class with their resources to keep control of these types of professions. So it starts happening in the late 19th and early 20th century as you have the emergence of a lot of new universities. So Rockefeller establishes the University of Chicago. Vanderbilt establishes his university. Carnegie Mellon does so because Carnegie was big in steel. This was an engineering school. Some of you may be applying there. So the idea was, we're going to have schools that are going to attract that middle class. So those WASPy, upwardly mobile people can be in the same areas. And obviously that's important because that's going to allow for business contacts to be made in those areas. When these institutions become coeducational, it allows for marriages to happen. So we're keeping that within that upper middle class. And you could say, well, all this is doing is it's creating more opportunities for that WASPy middle class and for that upwardly mobile middle class. But if you think about people like these, right, the immigrants, particularly the Jewish immigrants, this was not the group of people that were seen as the target group for these sorts of universities. So they were absolutely elitist, and they were absolutely trying to protect class status from the very beginning. So I think what's important about this is, if you go back to this idea, the middle class status anxiety and the middle class desiring to protect that status, this is what all of those professional associations, so law schools, business schools, they were designed to basically allow the middle class to hold its position and to not allow it to fall back into the working class, and not to allow the working class to move up into their class position. because the middle class realized, okay, I can be a lawyer or a doctor. I'm unlikely am I going to be able to make, the kind of money that these super wealthy people are. But what's interesting about this is you're beginning to see social and cultural developments around that middle class. And why is this important? Well, many of you are heading off to schools like this. Not necessarily the specific ones, but you're heading off to schools whose original purpose was to protect the class status that many of you, if you're upper middle class and white from Concord or Carlisle, you're following in a 120-year tradition of protecting your class status along those ethnic and racial lines. Now, there's nothing to feel bad about there, other than to understand that, of course, now these schools are doing a much better job of getting more people, diverse background, but less than you would think. And so it still serves that role. So what I would have you think after watching this video is, to what extent is conspicuous consumption still a thing in American culture? You can think about it specifically kind of with celebrity culture and very, very rich people. How does that manifest? You can also think about the role of education and graduate schools, which many of you are going to attend, and what that purpose is and how that operates as well.